3 scary true horror street Ories. I used to think nothing ever happened in Missouri. Small towns, quiet woods, and the kind of silence that wraps around you like a blanket. That was before summer came, and everything I believed about safety vanished in a single night. It started in Jefferson County, not far from where the forest meets the old train tracks. My friend Leah and I were walking back from a bonfire near Granger Hill. We weren't supposed to be out that late, but it was the last weekend before school. We had 2 friends with us, Mason, who always cracked jokes to calm the mood, and Danny, quieter but sharp. The 4 of us had done this every year. This time felt different. On the way back, we passed an abandoned service road. Leah stopped and stared. That's when we saw him, a man standing completely still in the center of the road. He was too tall, too thin. His skin looked sickly gray-green, like something left out in the rain. He didn't blink, just smiled, wide and crooked, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth. In his eyes, they glowed yellow, round and watching. Mason laughed it off, tried to wave at him. The man didn't move, but we all felt something change. The air grew heavy. Danny whispered that we should leave. We walked faster, but I could hear footsteps that didn't belong to any of us. Then we heard Ithis' voice. It didn't sound real, like it came from under the ground and inside our heads at the same time. He said one thing: "You shouldn't have seen me." We ran. No one spoke until we got back to the car, but Leah swore she saw him again in the rearview mirror, even though the road was empty. That night, my bedroom lights flickered on and off at 3:12 a.m. I looked out the window and saw nothing, but I knew he was still there, waiting, watching. Sometimes horror doesn't knock on your door. It just follows you home. After that night in Jefferson County, things didn't go back to normal. Leah barely spoke. Danny started keeping the lights on while she slept. Mason pretended everything was fine, but I could see the edge in his smile. As for me, I stopped walking past mirrors after sunset. There was something behind our reflections, something waiting. We all agreed not to talk about it anymore. We made a silent deal to forget, but forgetting is a lie, especially when fear has already moved into the empty spaces of your life. 3 weeks later, Leah called me at 2:47 a.m. Her voice sounded like it had been scraped thin. She didn't say hello. She only said one word: "He's here." I drove to her house without thinking. Danny and Mason were already there, sitting in the living room in silence. The television was on, but the screen was pure static. Leah stood by the window, staring out into the yard. Her eyes were wide, but there were no tears, just silence. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. There was no sign of anyone outside, no footprints in the frost-covered grass, no sound. But the house felt wrong, like the walls were breathing too slow. Leah told us about the man. She said he'd been standing across the street for 3 nights, just watching, never moving. She tried calling the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. No one believed her, but we did. She said he whispered her name without opening his mouth. She said she saw her bedroom door open from the inside while she stood in the hallway. No footsteps, no voice, just her name, Leah. We didn't know what to do, but Danny had an idea. She said her uncle used to own a property upstate, abandoned now, a place we could go to clear our heads. Somewhere far from here. We all said yes, too quickly. We didn't want to admit it, but we were afraid to be alone. The cabin was near the edge of Mark Twain National Forest, almost touching the Missouri-Arkansas border. The road leading there was barely visible, just a dirt path swallowed by trees. The place was old, but still solid. No electricity, no signal. A perfect place to disappear, or be forgotten. The first night passed without anything strange. We played cards, lit a fire, tried to laugh. It almost felt real, but that peace cracked on the second night. Around 1 a.m., Mason woke us up. He heard something moving outside, not walking, dragging. We gathered by the window, too afraid to speak. Then we saw the shadow, tall, slow, gliding across the edge of the trees. We couldn't see his face, but we knew it was him, the yellow-eyed man. He was humming. Leah stepped back from the window. Her hands were shaking. She said she could hear him inside her head again. He was calling her name, like it was a secret only they shared. We tried to stay awake, but the cold crept in and pulled us down. At some point, I must have passed out near the fire. When I woke up, Leah was gone. We found her standing in the woods, barefoot, staring at an old house we hadn't seen before. It shouldn't have been there. We would have noticed. But it stood between the trees like it had always belonged. No lights, no windows, just black wood and a crooked door slightly open. Leah said she had to go inside, said he was waiting, said he promised to leave us alone if she came. We tried to stop her, but it was like she didn't hear us. Danny grabbed her arm and screamed her name. That was when the door opened wider, all on its own. Inside, it was darker than night. No shape, no sound, just that cold, wet feeling of being watched. I took a step forward, but Mason stopped me. Don't. His voice was different. It was shaking, but not from fear, from knowing. We backed away. The door closed by itself. There was a sound, almost like whispering wood. Then silence. We searched until dawn, but the house was gone. Just trees, just dirt, no footprints, no Leah. We came back to town with nothing but silence and half a lie. People say she ran away, that she was troubled, but we know better. We know he took her. We know he's still watching. And we know this isn't over. He doesn't want to be seen, but he wants to be followed. That house wasn't a place. It was an invitation, and someone will answer it again. 2 months passed, without a word from Leah. No calls, no messages, not even a whisper on the wind. We kept living like ghosts in our own lives. Danny started drawing her face in charcoal every night. Mason moved out of the city and stopped replying. I stayed in Missouri, waking up at 3:17 a.m. every night without reason. Always 3:17, always cold. Then, something strange happened. Danny found a letter at her doorstep. No postage, no name, just a folded page inside, with 5 words, written in faded ink. Ash Hollow, he walks at dusk. We traced it to a real place in Wyoming, a small, abandoned mining town buried near the Wind River Range. Nobody had lived there since 1968. Locals refused to go near it. Some said they heard voices in the fog. Some said those who stayed after sunset didn't come back the same. Mason didn't want to go, but I convinced him. We owed her that much. Danny was already packing before I finished speaking. We drove for hours, past empty roads and dead trees. By the time we saw the rotted sign for Ash Hollow, the sky was already turning gray. The town was small, 1 street, a few crumbling buildings, a church with no roof. Everything smelled like ash and dry leaves. The wind didn't blow here, it just hovered. We found the first sign of her near the general store. A piece of blue fabric tangled in the broken doorway, Leah's scarf, the one she wore the night she disappeared. Danny picked it up with shaking hands. Mason stepped inside first. The floor groaned like it was tired of holding secrets. Inside, there were footprints. Just one set, barefoot, leading toward the back room. We followed, slowly, careful not to speak. There were marks on the walls, scratches, numbers, repeated over and over. 317, 317, 317. Danny turned pale. Mason clenched his jaw. I felt my pulse in my throat. The air was thicker now, like breathing through someone else's lungs. The back room was empty, just dust and broken shelves, but we heard it, a sound like someone exhaling behind the walls. Then a whisper that didn't match any voice we knew. She's not alone. We ran out of that store and didn't stop until we reached the church. The moment we stepped inside, everything changed. The light dimmed without the sun moving. The temperature dropped. The floor was lined with old photographs, all of Leah. Some taken from angles none of us remembered, some showing her asleep. One had her standing in front of a house with no doors. We didn't speak, we just looked. And then we heard the bells. There were no bells, but they rang anyway. Mason turned toward the sound and froze. At the edge of the altar stood the man, the same one. Yellow eyes, gray skin, his smile too wide, his arms too long. He didn't move. He just stood, watching, like he'd been waiting. Danny whispered his name before she even realized. Hollis. We didn't know where that came from. She said it wasn't hers. It just slipped through her mouth like someone else had borrowed her voice. He smiled wider. Then he was gone. No footsteps, no air displaced, just absence. But he left something behind, carved into the altar. One word. Next, we left Ash Hollow before dark. No one spoke during the drive. We knew it now. This wasn't about Leah anymore. We weren't searching for her. We were being led, each place a piece of a larger pattern, each whisper another thread in his design. And the game wasn't over. It had just begun. We didn't speak of Ash Hollow for days. Mason blocked the photos on his phone. Danny started writing in a journal she never let us see. I kept dreaming of doorways. All of them led to the same place. A white house surrounded by pine trees, always silent, always waiting. One night, I woke up with a piece of paper in my hand. I didn't remember writing on it, but there it was. Northport, Maine. No one argued. We knew what it meant. The name on the altar next. Hollis had drawn a line, and now we were following it, willingly or not. Northport was small, tucked along the coast. We found the house easily. It looked exactly like in my dream. White paint peeling, windows clouded, porch sagging like it remembered being alive. There was no mailbox. No number on the door. The locals called it the Quiet House, said it had never sold, though no one ever put it up for sale. Children crossed the street to avoid it. Some whispered that it was a place for unfinished stories. One old man at the diner muttered a warning. If you go inside, don't speak his name. We entered before noon. It was colder inside than out. The air felt still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The walls were covered in wallpaper that peeled in strips. Every corner felt watched. But there was no sound, no creak, no breath, just quiet. We moved from room to room. Dust marked where things used to be. A bed with no mattress. A cracked mirror above a fireplace. A painting of a family where all the faces had been scratched out. In the attic, we found something new. A circle drawn in chalk. Around it, photographs. Not of Leah, of us. Mason holding his dog in Denver. Danny painting in her college studio. Me on the beach, laughing. None of us had taken these. We stood in silence, the air closing in. That was when we heard it. Footsteps above us. There was no floor above the attic, but we heard them. Slow, measured, and then we saw him again. Through the broken window, watching from the tree line. Still, too still. His mouth curled in that slow smile, like he knew we saw him. Hollis. Yellow eyes, glowing faintly in the shade. Danny stepped toward the window. The moment her foot crossed the chalk circle, the door slammed shut. We were locked in. The silence deepened. It became physical, pressing against our eardrums. The air grew heavy, Mason shouted. But no sound came out. He tried again. Nothing. We had no voice in this place. Then, one by one, the photos began to burn. No flame, just curling edges and blackened faces. I grabbed Danny. She was frozen, eyes wide, hands shaking. In the silence, her lips moved. He's already inside. The lights flickered. A crack spread across the floor beneath the chalk. The boards groaned. Not with weight, with breath. The house exhaled something that wasn't air, cold, bitter, hollow. A shadow moved past the wall, not cast by us, slower than movement should be, taller than the ceiling allowed. We broke the window, The glass didn't shatter. It vanished, like it had never been there. Mason tried the door again. Locked. No handle. The room was collapsing, without moving. Then a voice, not spoken, but etched into our heads. Say my name. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Danny fell to her knees, holding her ears, screaming soundlessly. Mason kicked at the door. I stood there, frozen, the word repeating again and again. Say it. But I didn't. None of us did. Something shifted. The floor went still. The photos stopped burning, and the window was back. I pulled Danny up and we ran. Mason shoved the door open like it had never been locked. We didn't look back. Outside, the sun was still up. The house looked smaller now, empty, like nothing had happened. But we knew better. As we reached the car, Danny turned to me, her voice hoarse but steady. We're not following him. He's leading us. That night, we stayed at a roadside motel 2 towns over. Mason didn't sleep. Danny drew something over and over. A tree with no leaves. A house beneath it. Hollis in the doorway. Watching. Waiting. And in my dream that night, he spoke again. Only once. You're almost ready.